I'm speaking today with Alan Kong, Director of Alan Kong Architects in Melbourne, Australia. Do you have anything to add to your introduction, Alan?
Yeah, I'd just like to say a bit about my background heritage in terms of my Chinese background, my Scottish background, my English background and my Indigenous Australian background, which I think all plays into how I approach my architecture.
So that cultural diversity is very important. You're not just from Melbourne. So when you start to design a project for people with dementia, do you have a goal in mind? I mean, do you have something you're trying to achieve from the very beginning?
Yeah, the overarching principles that I put into my architecture is how to design a environment that's healthy for people. So when you start thinking about people with dementia, that's the target that I have, to make a healthy environment for people living with dementia.
So the target is?
To create a healthy environment for people living with dementia.
So when you say a healthy environment, what to you makes a healthy environment for them? What health is a very complicated question, especially with people with dementia.
Yes, so when I'm designing for people, I start from a point of view of, what is a healthy environment for all people, and then overlay that with specific needs for people with who might be outriders in that sort of general healthy environment. And so the dementia specific aspect that I think about is the wayfinding and what people with dementia need to have specifically to find their spaces manageable and meaningful.
So healthy being an environment that supports them in what they need to do, would you say that's like wayfinding that helps them find their way? Is that what you mean by healthy environment?
Well, for people with dementia specifically, yes, being able to navigate their environment, understand what their environment means. So we have to sort of create a simple and legible environment for people living with dementia.
So healthy environment for you means an environment that supports them as individuals.
Correct. And you could sort of turn that around in terms of how much people feel in control of their environment as well. So both sides of the coin. So you have to feel like you're in control as well as being able to be in control.
Well, that's very interesting. So it's not only that they can do things that they want to do, it's that they feel empowered.
Correct. Yeah, and I think that's one of the fundamentals that all people will need in having a healthy environment to live in.
So where do you start when you're trying to get towards those goals? I mean, when you're saying I want to create an environment that empowers them, people with dementia, to be themselves and to achieve what they want, where do you start? That's the goal. Where do you start the process?
Well, the design process starts sort of a little bit before that, in terms of how you actually, the place you're actually about to design in, the overall environment, the geography, the whether it's a city, suburb, rural context, they're all sort of background and the places you have to design into. So you have to, I feel like you have to create a place that's appropriate in its context. So you start from the context and then work forward for the people who are about to live in this place, and then how the building or the architecture, because the architecture, I look at the architecture more as more than just the building, but it's the building and the space around the building and inside the building. So we're sort of designing the shades of space between what might be fully internal and fully external. So that's the way I start thinking about things. So it's not just a building in isolation. It's how the layers of space work between outside and inside, and how best to shape all those spaces so that we can create the subtlety and the props that people need to understand the environment and how that environment can then support them.
I visited with you one of your buildings in an urban setting, and I also visited with you one of your buildings in a sort of suburban or almost country setting. And what you're saying is that where you begin is the interplay between the building and the interior and the exterior, so that you are not just creating a little box, it's an open box.
Yes. One of the early researchers that I followed was Des Lugg, who was the Director of Polar Medicine at Antarctic, Australian Antarctic Research.
Tell me more about the research that you're interested in.
Yes. So that was one of my early researches into the psychological effects of environment on people. The counterintuitive take-home message I had from that research was that in order for people to live a most healthy life, is that they need to have everyday contact with the external environment. So that's been a very strong aspect of the way of approach to design for people living in residential care. And that need for connection to outside environment, I think, has been well recognised.
How much does research play? I mean, old research, new research. Do you follow research on designing for people with dementia and on the needs independent of a project?
Yes, a bit of a junkie, really.
But that's important, right?
Oh, it's fundamental. You can't sort of just front up one day and go, yes, I'm going to design for these people I know nothing about. I try and follow every snippet of information I get about people people generally, and people especially with dementia or other particular needs.
Yeah. Do you consider your work evidence-based?
Oh, totally. It's every aspect I've put into my design has been derived by reading or participating in research, either firsthand or reading widely.
One of the interesting parts about architectural work and your work is the aesthetic question, and that you can't. Aesthetics is not evidence-based. So where does your sense of the aesthetic come into your design, along with the evidence base?
Yeah, aesthetics are as you say, quite a tricky question, and some would say it's always in the eye of the beholder. But I think there is a little bit of research and understanding in that area as well, because it's contextual, aesthetic. So for instance, if you're building in a suburban street with everyone with a brick veneer and tile roof, the likelihood is that for someone moving into that environment in a new building, if you didn't do that, you'd be going counter to what everyone else in the street believes is a beautiful environment. And so if you want to be part of the neighbourhood, You just have to, you're best to fit in rather than stand out. But the choice of standing out also has its place as well. So, and there's a lot of architectural theorists who have investigated that for some time.
When I visited your buildings, and I visited a number with you, not only the recent ones but also other ones in the interior near and inside Melbourne, one of the things that struck me was the kind of the use of wood, the use of the linkage to the outside, trees, nature, not simplicity, I wouldn't say, but not, it felt all natural. Would you say that that is something geared towards wanting someone to feel a certain thing about the building if they're using it? I would consider that also an aesthetic, wouldn't you?
Yes. The and like you say, there's, as soon as you choose something, it has like a material, like a weatherboard or something. It's got such a multi-layered meaning to it. It's got its environmental sustainability aspect. It's got its history of what people associate a weatherboard building to be, and it has a tactile aspect to it, and has a natural aspect to it that people will relate to in sort of a comforting way. So, and then it also has, if I follow the feng shui and traditional Chinese medicine, it has another energetic meaning that gives people a particular feeling and strength if you're near in an environment that has timber in it. It also has, for the particular client group that we're working with in some of those projects, they'd come from sort of fairly harsh backgrounds, in some coming out of prisons and other difficult and sometimes brutal environments that are mostly made out of tremendously hard materials like off-form concrete and plain brickwork, and so to create an environment that's separate to that.
So you've spoken to me about you wanted to feel like old shoes, not new shoes. You use the word cuddling. Does that aesthetic feed into that, and in what way?
Yeah, correct. That the softer material, you feel like you can sort of lean up against it and it's not going to be abrasive to you. So it sort of gives you a softer feel that you feel like you want to have a tactile building. You feel like you can touch it and lean up against it and be almost one with it. And that also gives a practical result in that people with older people would generally have less robust skin, and so that helps from that point of view as well.
But do you think that that's an important piece to the aesthetic for people with dementia and older people with dementia?
Having a building that you feel totally comfortable with, I think that's a very important part. It creates a much more familiar, and like you say, the old shoe, it's something where the shoe is sort of moulded to fit the person after time, and so you become one with that with the shoe. It's fitted to you.
And so one way to think about that also is you want people to have the feeling of comfort with their furniture, the feeling of comfort with their bedspread, or the feeling of comfort with their clothing. And if you're going to create an environment they're going to live in, you want to have them to have that same sense of comfort.
Correct. And the comfort also means that you could be comfortable in leaving stuff around, so that then becomes an architectural design issue about how the space is laid out, because in its basic form, architecture is the use and defining of space. So you can't just have the materiality, you have to have the space in the right shape and size and position to allow those feelings of comfort to take place.
Talked about, getting things in the right place, and it has to do with plans. Are there any, if you had a young person come into your office, or if somebody said, well, take some of your experience and tell me, what are the big design lessons you've learned? Would you say there are any? There are some. You've mentioned some already. Paying attention to the context, making it comfortable, using materials that are comfortable, that you can lean up against. Are there other design lessons like that that you would say are important for all architects to pay attention to when they're designing for people living with dementia?
Yeah, I think that architects are fairly well versed in thinking about materials and space. I think what I caution or suggest to young architects is that to be very mindful of who they're designing for, because architects can tend to have a habit to design for sort of what architectural theory, in being overly mindful of how the building might appear in a pure material and aesthetic sense, in an architectural aesthetic sense, and that's so. I like to try and, I spend a lot of time making the buildings look like they do. So it's not as if I say it's not anything goes. That's far from the truth. The aesthetic that I'll reshape that. Architects are so mindful of the visual aesthetic environment, and we're driven and trained in a way to be attracted to the novel in architectural form and detail and attractiveness, which has its place in architecture, but in this setting it is almost the opposite to what you need to do. So that's what I'd sort of caution a young architect.
Just to end up, I've been asking everybody one question at the end of each interview, and that is, if I gave you the task of designing a poster, only one poster, to hang on the wall about dementia design, which operators, developers, designers, everyone involved with the process would read on a daily basis when they walked into the office, what would you put on that poster?
I think we have to follow research, and you have to try and make sure that the end result of your work for the people with dementia is meaningful and manageable, and encourages and enables people to do what they want or need to do. I think that's the thing we have to keep in mind.
So maybe the headline on the poster would say, "Pay attention," and then you'd have what you just said. Well, Alan, this has been most informative, and we really appreciate your sharing with us so much of the feeling of the design. I mean, what was interesting to me is how you feel about the design process, and you feel about the buildings that you make, and you feel about the users. And I think that that's an important element to what comes out the other side, the building design, the feeling of that building, and how people relate to it once they're in it. So thank you so much for taking the time and for sharing with us your experience.
Okay, my pleasure.